The email landed in my inbox like a bomb waiting to explode. Rogers International facing hostile takeover. 5 simple words that made my coffee turn bitter in my mouth. I hadn't heard that name in years, not since the night I walked away from everything I was supposed to inherit. My name is Athena, and 5 years ago, my father tried to sell me like a corporate asset. "You can't seriously be considering this," I remember saying, standing in his mahogany-lined office. The same office where I'd spent countless hours as a child, watching him build his empire. An arranged marriage? In 2018? It's a merger of families, Athena. The Claytons have influence we need. My father, Raphael, didn't even look up from his computer. Xander is a fine young man. Harvard MBA, good family. I don't care if he's God's gift to business. I'm not a bargaining chip. That finally made him look up. "You've always understood what this family requires. What did you think all those years of grooming you as my successor were for?" I slammed my hands on his desk. "To run the company, not to be sold off like medieval property." "Don't be dramatic." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "The marriage secures both families' interests. You'll learn to appreciate Xander." "I already have someone in my life," I said quietly. "That startup boy? Please." He waved his hand dismissively. "This isn't a discussion, Athena. The contracts are being drawn up." My phone buzzed. A text from Reagan. "You okay? Standing by if you need backup." I straightened my spine. "If you do this, you'll lose me." "Don't threaten me." His voice turned to ice. "You have everything because of this family. Without us, you're nothing." The words hit like physical blows, but I refused to flinch. "Watch me." I walked out of that office, leaving behind my trust fund, my inheritance, and the only family I'd known since Mom died. Within hours, my accounts were frozen. By morning, I was locked out of the building where I'd worked since graduating college. "You can't just crash on my couch forever," Reagan said a week later, watching me apply for jobs on my laptop. "Watch me," I said again, the phrase becoming my mantra. "I'm serious." She sat beside me. "You need a plan. I have one." I turned the screen to show her my business proposal. "Remember that app idea I told you about? The one Dad said was worthless?" She scanned the document, eyebrows rising. "You're really doing this?" "With or without help?" I managed to smile. "But with would be nice." That night, Reese joined us. He'd quit his job at Rogers International the day after I left, showing up at Reagan's with takeout and his savings account information. "You're insane," he said, but he was grinning. "Let's do it." We worked around the clock, living on coffee and determination. My father's name opened doors, but it was my ideas that kept them open. Within 2 years, our startup was valued at 8 figures. I never looked back. Until today. The email still glowed on my screen. Below the headline was a detailed report of Rogers International's vulnerabilities. Bad investments, lost contracts, whispers of ethical breaches. My father's empire was crumbling. My phone rang. Reagan's name flashed on the screen. "Tell me you've seen it," she said without preamble. "I'm looking at it now." "What are you thinking?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the Seattle skyline through my office window. "I'm thinking it's time to go shopping for some shares." "Athena?" Her voice held a warning. "Revenge isn't your style." "This isn't revenge." I touched the screen where my father's company name glowed. "This is justice. He wanted to sell me to save his company. Now I'm going to buy his company to save its people." "You're going to need help." "I know." I smiled. "Good thing I have the best team in tech. And the best friend." "That too." I pulled up another email, this one from our investment team. "Want to help me take down a giant?" "Always." She paused. "What about Xander?" "What about him?" "He's on the board now. His family's shares could be crucial." I remembered the awkward dinner where my father had introduced us. Xander's rehearsed compliments and calculated smile. "He's exactly where we need him to be," thinking he's untouchable. "You've changed." Reagan said softly. No. I closed my laptop. Decision made. I just finally became who I was always meant to be, without my father's shadow over me. And now? Now? I stood up, gathering my things for the board meeting where we'd discuss our next acquisition. Now I'm going to show him exactly what nothing looks like. The Seattle rain started falling, washing the city clean. Soon it would wash away the last traces of my father's legacy, leaving something stronger in its place. Something built on merit, not manipulation. I was no longer the daughter who walked away. I was the woman who would make him wish he'd never let me go. 30 million? Reese nearly choked on his espresso. That's what they're valuing the shares at? We were in my office, overlooking the bustling tech district where our company had grown from a dream into a powerhouse. 5 years of relentless work had transformed us from 3 people on a couch to a team of hundreds. They're desperate, I said, sliding the financial report across my desk. The board is splitting into factions. Half want to oust my father, the other half are too scared to move against him. And we're about to make their decision easier. Reese's fingers drummed against his coffee cup. You know this is insane, right? Using our success to buy into your father's failure? Poetic, isn't it? The door opened and Reagan burst in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. You need to hear this. She didn't bother with greetings, just placed her phone on speaker and set it on my desk. The rumors are true. A voice crackled through. Raphael's losing control. 3 board members are already looking to sell their shares, but they're doing it quietly. They don't want to cause a panic. Who's your source? I asked. Remember Maria from accounting? She moved to Rogers International last year. Says the place is a powder keg waiting to blow. I pulled up our company's financial projections. How much can we move without raising red flags? 10 million without anyone blinking, Reese said. Maybe 15 if we structure it right. Do it. I met his eyes. Through the shell company we set up, no one can know it's us. Athena. Reagan's voice held that careful tone she used when she thought I was making a mistake. Are you sure this isn't too personal? Everything's personal in business. I stood up, walking to the window. That's what he taught me, remember? Yeah, but a knock interrupted us. My assistant poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but you have the investor call in 5 minutes. Thanks, Sarah. I turned back to my friends. Reese, start the process. Reagan, keep your source talking. I want to know everything happening in that building. They stood to leave, but Reagan lingered. There's something else. Xander's been asking about you. My stomach tightened. What about me? He's heard about our success. Wants to know if you'd be interested in a friendly merger now. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. 5 years too late. That's what I thought. She hesitated. But he's having dinner with your father tonight. Apparently they still meet regularly. Of course they do. I felt the old anger stirring. 2 men who think they can buy and sell people's lives. Just be careful. If anyone's going to recognize your moves, it's them. After she left, I joined the investor call, discussing expansion plans and profit margins with people who'd never know they were funding my redemption. By evening, Reese had texted confirmation. Our first block of shares was secured. I was reviewing the purchase documents when my office phone rang. The number was blocked. Hello? Is this Ms. Athena? A woman's voice, nervous but determined. I'm sorry to call so late, but I work for your father. I sat up straighter. How did you get this number? That's not important. What's important is that I have information you need to hear. She took a shaky breath. About what really happened with the Malaysian contract. I'm listening. For the next 20 minutes, she detailed a scheme of bribes and falsified documents that made my blood run cold. When she finished, I had pages of notes and a new understanding of just how far my father had fallen. Why are you telling me this? Because some of us remember how different things were when you were there. She paused. And because we've seen the share purchases, we know something's coming. After hanging up, I called Reese. How fast can we move on the next block of shares? Why? What's changed? Everything. I looked at my notes. Dad's not just losing control. He's breaking laws. If this gets out, the company crashes, Reese finished, and everyone loses their jobs. Exactly. We need to move faster. I pulled up my calendar. There's a charity gala next week. Every major player in Seattle tech will be there, including your father. And Xander. I smiled grimly. Time to see what they're really afraid of. What are you planning? Something crazy. I started typing an email to our legal team. But first, I need you to set up a meeting with our friend in the SEC. Off the books. Athena. Now Reese's voice held the warning tone. Once you start this. I know. I thought of the whistleblower's voice, of all the people depending on their jobs. But someone has to stop him before he takes everyone down with him. And that someone has to be you? I looked at the photo on my desk, taken the day we launched our company. 3 friends with nothing but dreams and determination. He taught me everything I know about business, I said quietly, including how to destroy one. The city lights flickered outside my window like stars waiting to fall. By this time next month, my father's empire would be mine. The only question was, how many people would get hurt in the process? Aurora Holdings. I tested the name on my tongue, watching the lawyers file the final paperwork. Simple, elegant, and completely untraceable. And now the proud owner of 23% of Rogers International, Reese added, sliding the confirmation across my desk. Another 10% and we'll have controlling interest. My phone buzzed. A message from our SEC contact. Documents received. Meeting tomorrow at 9. The pieces are falling into place, I said, forwarding the message to Reese. How's the gala preparation going? You're officially on the guest list under Aurora's CEO credentials. They're expecting Jessica Palmer. He grinned. Nice touch using your mother's maiden name, by the way. A knock interrupted us. Reagan entered, looking worried. We have a situation. Xander's been asking questions about Aurora Holdings. My stomach tightened. What kind of questions? The dangerous kind. He's hired private investigators to look into our shell company. Let them look. I pulled up Aurora's documentation on my screen. Everything's legal and layered through 3 different countries. Even if they trace it, they'll hit walls. That's not all. Reagan sat down, her expression grave. Your father's called an emergency board meeting for Friday. Maria says he's planning something big. He's trying to consolidate power before he loses it completely. I checked the calendar. The gala's Thursday night. Perfect timing. For what? Reese asked. For Jessica Palmer to introduce herself to Seattle's tech elite. I smiled. And maybe have a chat with my father's closest allies. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. The SEC meeting confirmed what we suspected. My father's dealings weren't just unethical, they were illegal. But we needed proof. Documentation that only someone inside could access. Thursday evening found me standing before my mirror, hardly recognizing myself. A blonde wig, colored contacts, and subtle makeup changes transformed me into Jessica Palmer, the mysterious CEO of Aurora Holdings. You look nothing like you, Reagan said, adjusting my wig. But please be careful. If they recognize you, they won't. I checked my clutch. Invitation, phone, recorder. Men like my father and Xander see what they expect to see. And they're expecting a stranger. The gala was held at the Museum of Modern Art, the same venue where I'd attended countless events as Raphael's daughter. Now I walked in as someone else entirely, watching familiar faces fail to recognize me. Ms. Palmer? A young assistant approached. Mr. Xander would like to speak with you. Perfect. I found him by the bar, looking exactly as I remembered. Expensive suit, practiced smile, eyes that calculated everything they saw. Jessica Palmer. He extended his hand. I've been very interested in meeting you. Have you? I kept my voice soft, slightly accented. I suppose that's why you've been investigating my company? He had the grace to look embarrassed. Business requires due diligence, especially with such aggressive market moves. Like buying shares in Rogers International? I sipped my champagne. Perhaps I simply recognize a good investment opportunity. Or perhaps you're working with someone else? His eyes narrowed. Someone with a personal interest in the company? Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Xander, there you are. My father approached, looking older than I remembered. Gray touched his temples now, and lines creased his face that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Raphael, Xander greeted. Meet Jessica Palmer, CEO of Aurora Holdings. My father's handshake was firm. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Fascinating company you've built, Ms. Palmer. Rather quickly, too. Some of us don't need decades to build something worthwhile, I replied, watching his smile falter. Indeed. He studied me closer. You remind me of someone. My heart pounded, but I held his gaze. I doubt that. I would remember meeting someone like you. Nevertheless, he pulled out his phone, checking a message. His face darkened. If you'll excuse me, I have some business to attend to. As he walked away, Xander leaned closer. He's right, you know. There's something familiar about you. Maybe you're both seeing ghosts. I set down my empty glass. Or maybe you're just afraid of what you can't control. I left him at the bar, moving through the crowd. Throughout the evening, I spoke with board members, dropping hints about upcoming changes, watching alliances shift in real time. By midnight, I had 3 more shareholders willing to sell. Back in my car, I removed the wig with shaking hands. My phone lit up with a message from Maria. Emergency board meeting canceled. Raphael looking desperate. What did you do? Exactly what I needed to. I texted back. Be ready for Monday. Reese called as I was driving home. Stock's already moving in after hours trading. Word's getting out about Aurora Holdings. Good. I watched the city lights blur past. Have our lawyers ready. Monday morning, we go public with our ownership stake. And then? I smiled, thinking of my father's face when he'd studied mine, looking right through me. Then we show them exactly who they're dealing with. The city stretched before me, a maze of lights and shadows. Somewhere in those streets, my father was probably plotting his next move, never suspecting that his own daughter was about to become his boss. Monday couldn't come soon enough. The weekend crawled by like molasses, but Monday morning exploded into chaos. I watched from my office as financial news networks lit up with the announcement, Aurora Holdings reveals 31% stake in Rogers International. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. I ignored them all except one. They're panicking, Maria reported, her voice hushed. Your father's locked himself in his office with the legal team. Xander's been running between floors like his suit's on fire. Any other reactions? Thomas from the board is practically dancing. Says he's been waiting years for someone to challenge Raphael. A text from Reese flashed on my screen. Turn on Channel 8 now. I grabbed the remote, and there was my father, surrounded by reporters outside his building. He looked composed, but I could see the tension in his jaw. The same tension he'd shown the night I left. Aurora Holdings investment shows confidence in our company's future, he was saying. We welcome their partnership and look forward to discussing their vision for... Mr. Rogers, a reporter interrupted. Sources say Aurora has been meeting with other shareholders. Are you concerned about a potential takeover? The muscle in his jaw twitched. Rogers International has been family-run for 30 years. That won't change. I muted the TV as Reagan walked in. Ready for phase 2? Already in motion. I pulled up an email on my screen. The SEC received our whistleblower package this morning, complete with documentation of the Malaysian deal. How long until they act? Hours, maybe days. I stood up, straightening my blazer. But that's not what I'm waiting for. What then? That. I pointed to my phone as it lit up with a number I recognized. My father's private line. I put it on speaker. Jessica Palmer speaking. Ms. Palmer. His voice was controlled, professional. I believe we need to talk. In person. I agree. Shall we say noon? Your office? A pause. I'd prefer neutral ground. The Metropolitan Club? Perfect. I smiled at Reagan. I look forward to it. After hanging up, Reagan shook her head. You're really going to meet him as Jessica? One last time. I opened my desk drawer, pulling out the blonde wig. I want to see his face when he realizes how badly he underestimated me. The Metropolitan Club was nearly empty when I arrived. Just a few business lunches scattered through the dimly lit space. My father sat at his usual table by the windows, Xander at his side. Gentlemen? I slid into the seat across from them, noting how they both studied my disguise. Shall we discuss the future of Rogers International? Let's discuss Aurora Holdings first. My father leaned forward. Who are you really working for? I work for my shareholders, Mr. Rogers, just like you should have been doing. Xander's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? The Malaysian contract, the offshore accounts, the buried environmental reports. I watched their faces pale. Should I continue? You're bluffing, my father said, but his hand shook slightly as he reached for his water. Am I? I pulled out my phone, showing them the SEC confirmation email. Your shareholders deserve to know how their company's being run. Don't you agree? What do you want? Xander demanded. Simple. Mr. Rogers steps down as CEO. The board appoints new leadership that won't trade ethics for profits. You can't. I can. I cut my father off. I have the shares, the evidence, and the support of key board members. The only question is whether you'll exit gracefully or in handcuffs. My father's face turned red. Do you know who I am? What I've built? I know exactly who you are. I stood up, removing my wig in one smooth motion. You taught me everything I know about business, Dad, including how to take what I want. The shock on their faces was everything I'd imagined. Xander actually knocked over his water glass. My father just stared, his complexion going from red to white. Athena? He whispered. Surprise. I smoothed my real hair back. Still think I'm nothing without you? This is impossible, Xander sputtered. You disappeared. You were running some tiny startup. That tiny startup just bought controlling interest in your company. I gathered my things. The board meets tomorrow at 9. I expect your resignation on my desk by then. I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me. Why? Looking back, I saw not the powerful man who'd tried to sell my future, but someone small. Someone who'd lost everything that mattered chasing things that didn't. Because you taught me that business is personal, I said softly. Consider this a daughter's gratitude for all those lessons. I walked out of the club into the bright Seattle afternoon, leaving them with the ruins of their empire. My phone buzzed, Reese sending confirmation that our legal team was ready for tomorrow. The game was nearly over. Tomorrow I'd take my father's seat at the head of his table. But first I had a company to save, not for revenge, but for all the people who deserved better than what he'd given them. Sometimes karma needs a little help, and I was happy to provide it. The boardroom fell silent as I walked in, all eyes fixed on me. My father's chair sat empty at the head of the table, a throne waiting for its new queen. Instead, I took a seat in the middle, between Reese and Reagan. Let's begin, Thomas, the senior board member, announced. As you're all aware, we're here to address the leadership transition and... The door burst open. My father stormed in, Xander trailing behind him like a shadow. This meeting is a farce, he declared, slapping a folder onto the table. I filed an injunction against Aurora Holdings. My lawyers will prove this hostile takeover is illegal. I kept my voice calm. On what grounds? Fraud, deception, using insider knowledge I gained 5 years after leaving the company? I raised an eyebrow. That'll be interesting to prove in court, especially given what the SEC is about to reveal about your own practices. Murmurs rippled through the room. Thomas cleared his throat. Perhaps we should address the elephant in the room. Athena, would you care to explain your position? I stood up. feeling every eye on me. Aurora Holdings now controls 42% of Rogers International shares. Combined with supporting shareholders, I nodded to several board members. We have a clear majority. Bought through lies, my father spat. No, through careful investment and strategy. Everything I learned from you, actually. I opened my laptop, connecting it to the room's display. Now, shall we discuss the real issues? Like the Malaysian contract? The color drained from his face as documents filled the screen. Emails, contracts, bank transfers. The board members leaned forward, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to anger. These transactions. Thomas adjusted his glasses. Are these authentic? Completely, Reese confirmed, along with evidence of environmental violations in 3 countries and systematic accounting fraud. Xander jumped up. You can't just sit down. I cut him off. Your family's involvement is documented too. Would you like me to show those files next? He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking very young and very scared. The SEC has all of this, I continued. They're announcing their investigation this afternoon, but we have a chance to get ahead of it. I clicked to the next slide, a comprehensive restructuring plan. We can save this company, but only with complete transparency and new leadership. You planned this all along, my father said quietly. Every move, every share purchase. I learned from the best. I met his eyes. You always said business was chess, not checkers. The next 2 hours were intense negotiations, punctuated by heated arguments and desperate attempts at compromise. But in the end, the numbers didn't lie, and neither did the evidence. The vote is final, Thomas announced. Raphael will step down as CEO, effective immediately. Athena will assume the role of executive chair, with the board's full support. My father stood up slowly, his shoulders bent as if under an invisible weight. You think you've won? This isn't about winning. I walked over to him, keeping my voice low. It's about fixing what you broke. The company, its people, their trust. Their trust? He laughed bitterly. What about my trust in you? My own daughter plotting behind my back. Like you plotted to sell me to the highest bidder? I stepped closer. The difference is, I'm here to build something better, not tear it down for profit. He stared at me for a long moment, something flickering in his eyes. Pride? Regret? Before I could decide, he turned and walked out, leaving his company badge on the table. Xander lingered, looking lost. What happens to me? That depends. I gathered my papers. Are you willing to work for a woman you once thought you could buy? He flinched but held my gaze. I was wrong, about a lot of things. Prove it. Help me clean up this mess and maybe you'll keep your job. After the room cleared, Reagan squeezed my shoulder. You okay? Ask me tomorrow. I looked around the boardroom, remembering all the times I'd sat here as a child, dreaming of the day I'd run the company. This isn't how I imagined it would happen. No, Reese said, gathering his things. It's better. You earned this, Athena. The hard way. My phone buzzed. A news alert. The SEC announcement had dropped. Within minutes, our PR team would release our statement about the leadership change and our commitment to transparency. What now? Reagan asked. I walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd lost everything and built myself back up. Now we do what I came here to do. We save the company, protect the employees, and make things right. And your father? I thought of his face as he left, of all the years I'd spent trying to make him proud. He made his choices. Now he has to live with them. I turned back to my friends, my partners in this crazy venture. Just like I have to live with mine. The setting sun painted the boardroom in shades of gold, a new dawn for an old empire. Tomorrow would bring challenges, investigations, and endless work. But for now, I allowed myself a moment to savor the victory that tasted less like revenge and more like justice. Your father's here. Sarah's voice crackled through the intercom. He's demanding to see you. I checked my watch. 9:15 a.m. 2 weeks since the takeover, and he'd finally shown up, right on schedule. Send him in. The door opened, and my father entered, looking both smaller and fiercer than I remembered. His suit was still impeccable, but his eyes held a wild energy I'd never seen before. Come to clean out your office? I asked, not looking up from my computer. Come to warn you. He dropped a stack of papers on my desk. The SEC investigation? It goes both ways. You used insider knowledge. From 5 years ago. I finally met his gaze. Ancient history, legally speaking. Try again. Damn it, Athena. He slammed his hands on the desk. Do you have any idea what you've done? The contracts we're losing, the partnership's falling apart. Because of my leadership? I stood up. Or because your illegal dealings are finally coming to light? I built this company through bribes and buried bodies. I pulled up the Malaysian contract on my screen. Want to explain why we were paying triple the market rate for labor? Or where those consulting fees really went? He fell silent, his face ashen. That's what I thought. I pressed the intercom. Sarah, please send in Mr. Thomas and the legal team. My father's eyes narrowed. What's this? Your chance at redemption. The door opened as Thomas entered with 2 lawyers. We're offering you a deal. I don't make deals with traitors. Then make one with your daughter. I softened my voice. The one who learned everything from you, including how to fix broken things. Thomas laid out the paperwork. We're prepared to offer you a consulting position. Limited scope, no executive power, but you'll help us transition key relationships and untangle the legitimate deals from the problematic ones. You want me to help dismantle my own legacy? I want you to help save it. I walked around the desk. The company's bleeding, Dad. Not because of me, but because of years of shortcuts and compromises. Help me fix it. He stared at the contract, his hands trembling slightly. And if I refuse? Then the SEC gets everything. Every email, every transaction, every meeting you had with officials who suddenly changed their minds about regulations. The room fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic below. I watched my father's face as he processed his options, seeing the exact moment he realized he was trapped. You really are my daughter, he said finally, a mix of pride and bitterness in his voice. I am. That's why I'm offering you this chance instead of burning everything down. He picked up the contract, scanning the terms. Limited consulting role, no board position, required cooperation with federal investigators. Take it, Thomas urged. It's more than fair given the circumstances. My father looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? Not just the takeover, but this moment right here. I learned from the best. I handed him a pen. Always be 3 moves ahead, remember? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And always have an exit strategy. He took the pen, his hand steady now. Even for your enemies. You're not my enemy, Dad. I watched him sign. You're my cautionary tale. After the lawyers left with the signed documents, my father lingered. What happens now? Now you go home, rest, and come back Monday ready to work. Under my leadership. Under my daughter's leadership. He straightened his tie. Never thought I'd say those words. Never thought you'd have to. I opened the door. See you Monday. After he left, Reagan and Reese came in, having watched everything from the adjacent office. Well, Reagan said, that was intense, but necessary. Reese examined the signed contract. You really think he'll play ball? He doesn't have a choice. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. And somewhere under all that pride, he knows this is his best option. Speaking of options, Reagan pulled up a chair. The board wants to know about the restructuring plan. How deep are we cutting? I pulled up the organizational chart we'd been working on. Not as deep as they think. We're not here to destroy, remember? We're here to rebuild. With your father as a consultant. Reese shook his head. That's either brilliant or insane. Maybe both. I looked out at the city, at the empire I'd inherited through conquest rather than succession. But sometimes you need to keep your enemies closer than your friends. He's still your father, Reagan said softly. Yes. I touched the photo on my desk, the only personal item I'd brought to this office. Me at graduation, my father's arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling. That's why this had to be done right. Not for revenge, but for redemption. Monday would bring new challenges, old wounds, and the complicated dance of working with the man who'd both made and broken me. But for now, I had won something more valuable than control of a company. I had won the chance to make things right. The first month working with my father was like defusing a bomb while teaching someone to dance. Every meeting was tense, every interaction loaded with unspoken history. These contracts are solid, he insisted, spreading documents across the conference room table. We've worked with these suppliers for 15 years. At inflated rates, I countered, pulling up our audit findings, and with kickbacks hidden in processing fees. That's how business is done in those regions. Was done. I highlighted the discrepancies. We're doing it differently now. A knock interrupted us. Xander entered, looking uncomfortable. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. The Jakarta team is threatening to walk. My father's face darkened. Because of the new compliance requirements? Because of what they're hiding, I said, standing. Conference them in. The next hour was a masterclass in negotiation, me leading, my father watching. I laid out the new terms: full transparency, fair wages, no more hidden fees. When they threatened to leak damaging information, I simply shared our own documentation first. Impressive, my father said after the call ended with a new, clean contract. You've learned to use truth as a weapon. I learned to use it as a shield. I gathered my papers. Something you never understood. He caught my arm as I turned to leave. I understood more than you think. I just chose differently. And how's that working out for you? His grip loosened. I deserve that. You deserve worse. I pulled away. But I'm not here for revenge anymore. Then why keep me around? Why not just bury me with the evidence? Before I could answer, Reagan burst in. Turn on the news, now. The financial networks were exploding with breaking news. Our biggest competitor had just been raided by federal agents. The same competitor that had been trying to buy us out for years. They're going down for the same things we almost did, my father said quietly. If I hadn't stopped you, that would be us. I turned to face him. That's why you're here. Because you know where all the bodies are buried and we need to dig them up before they poison everything. His phone buzzed. Probably other industry players panicking, looking for advice. Mine lit up too, but with a different message. From Thomas. Board emergency meeting in 10 minutes. The boardroom was chaos when we arrived. Directors arguing, phones ringing, fear thick in the air. Our stock is falling, someone shouted. The whole sector is tanking. Good thing we're not in that sector anymore, I said loudly, taking my place at the head of the table. As of this morning, we're officially a tech company with legacy holdings. Silence fell. My father, standing in the corner, straightened up. The restructuring? He said. You've already done it. I nodded to Reese, who distributed tablets showing our new corporate structure. While everyone was watching the compliance drama, we were rebuilding. Clean contracts, ethical partnerships, and a focus on actual innovation instead of financial engineering. The Jakarta team? Xander asked. Will be our new tech hub. Legitimate work. Fair pay. No kickbacks needed. You planned this, my father said, something like admiration in his voice. Use the industry crisis as cover for our transformation. Like you taught me. Never waste a good crisis. I met his eyes. Though I prefer creating opportunities instead of disasters. The board meeting lasted hours, but by the end, our new direction was clear. While our competitors scrambled to hide their sins, we were emerging clean, transformed, ready for the future. Later, in my office, my father lingered after the others left. I've been thinking about my role here, he said. Having second thoughts? No. He sat down heavily. Having revelations. Watching you today. You're better at this than I ever was. Because I'm not afraid of the truth. Because you understand something I forgot. He pulled out an old photo from his wallet. Me at my first business presentation, age 12, beaming with pride. Business isn't just about winning. It's about building something that lasts. Is this where you apologize for trying to sell me to the highest bidder? This is where I thank you for saving me from myself. He placed the photo on my desk. And where I ask if you're ready for what comes next. The federal investigation? The future. He stood up. Because after today, everyone knows there's a new player in town, and not everyone will be happy about it. I thought of the competitor being raided, of all the other companies like my father's old version of Rogers International, built on shadows and handshakes. Let them come, I said. We've got nothing to hide anymore. He nodded, a mix of pride and regret on his face. No, we don't. Thanks to you. As he left, I picked up the old photo, remembering that eager 12-year-old who wanted nothing more than to make her father proud. In the end, I'd done something better. I'd made myself proud. Ready for this? Reagan asked, adjusting my jacket as we stood backstage at the tech conference. The audience murmur filtered through the curtains, investors, journalists, and industry leaders all waiting to hear from the woman who'd transformed Rogers International from a scandal-plagued dinosaur into a tech powerhouse. Born ready. I checked my notes one last time. Where's Dad? Front row, looking nervous. She peeked through the curtain. Xander's with him. They're both actually behaving. Miracles never cease. The stage manager signaled. 2 minutes until my keynote. My phone buzzed with a message from Reese. Stock just hit an all-time high. You're trending on Twitter. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed. Please welcome Athena, CEO of Rogers Tech. I walked onto the stage to applause, spotting my father immediately. He'd lost weight, looked healthier since stepping back from power. Therapy and honest work had done wonders for both of us. Everyone expects me to talk about our technological innovations, I began. About our breakthrough in sustainable energy storage or our new quantum computing division. But today, I want to talk about something more fundamental. Truth. The audience quieted. 6 months ago, this company was built on lies. Today, we're built on transparency. The journey between those 2 points? That's the real innovation. I clicked through slides showing our transformation. Clean energy projects replacing corrupt contracts, ethical AI initiatives growing where bribery once flourished. My father taught me that business was war. I continued, meeting his eyes. He wasn't entirely wrong. But the real battle isn't against competitors or regulations. It's against the temptation to take shortcuts, to value profit over principle. Movement caught my eye. Federal agents entering the auditorium. Right on schedule. Speaking of principles, I said, I have an announcement. This morning, Rogers Tech provided evidence to the Justice Department that will help prosecute corruption across our entire industry. Not because we had to, but because it's right. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father sat straighter, chin high. He'd known this was coming, had helped compile the evidence himself. We're not just changing our company, I declared. We're changing the game. No more backdoor deals, no more buried bodies. From now on, success comes from innovation, not manipulation. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, in the green room, my father found me. That was quite a show, he said, hands in his pockets. You just painted a target on our backs. No, I just showed everyone we're bulletproof. I poured 2 coffees, handed him one. Transparency is better armor than secrecy ever was. When did you get so wise? When I stopped trying to be you and started being myself. He smiled, a real smile, not the corporate mask I'd grown up watching. I've been thinking about stepping back completely. Maybe do some teaching, share lessons learned the hard way. Planning your redemption arc? Learning from yours. He set down his coffee. I never apologized, did I? For trying to force you into that marriage, for choosing power over my own daughter. No, you didn't. I'm sorry, Athena. You deserved better. I got better. I gestured around us. I built better. The door opened as Reese and Reagan entered, followed by Xander. The feds want to talk timeline for the evidence handover, Reese reported. And 3 major tech blogs want exclusive interviews, Reagan added. And I, Xander said, want to apologize too. I was part of the old way of doing things. I'd like to be part of the new way. I studied him. The entitled boy who'd once thought he could buy me had become a man willing to learn. Prove it, I said. Help us build something that matters. My father touched my shoulder. You already have. Looking around at these people, my former enemies turned allies, my friends who'd become family, my father who'd learned to follow instead of force, I felt something settle into place. We all have, I said, and we're just getting started. Later that night, I stood in my office watching the city lights flicker like stars. My phone was full of messages, congratulations, interview requests, even a few threats from those who feared what our evidence would reveal. A knock at the door revealed Reagan with champagne and Reese with takeout. Just like old times, Reagan said, pouring glasses. Except now we're plotting world domination instead of startup survival. Not domination, I corrected. Revolution. To revolution, then. Reese raised his glass. And to the woman who turned revenge into redemption. To family, I added, thinking of my father's apology, of bridges burned and rebuilt stronger. The one we're born with and the one we choose. The city sparkled below, full of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to prove that doing good was good business. But tonight, surrounded by my chosen family, I was exactly where I needed to be. Not in anyone's shadow, but in my own light. To the future, we said together, and drank to the world we were building, one truth at a time.
I sit here staring at my phone, reading yet another guilt-tripping message from my mother about how I should give my half-sister one of my apartments. The audacity of her request doesn't surprise me anymore. No matter how many times I block her number, she finds new ways to reach me. Text messages, emails, even comments on social media, all demanding the same thing. To understand why I'm so adamant in my refusal, we need to go back 20 years. I was 6 when my world fell apart. Mom sat me down one evening in our living room, her face oddly calm as she twisted her wedding ring, and told me she'd fallen in love with someone else. Dad was moving out. I remember watching him pack his things, while Mom hovered impatiently by the door, checking her watch every few minutes. Mom didn't waste any time. The ink was barely dry on the divorce papers when she married Steve, and he moved into our house. Everything changed overnight. My princess drawings disappeared from the fridge, replaced by Steve's work schedule. My favorite cereal vanished from the pantry because Steve preferred healthy breakfast options. It was like someone had taken my home and rearranged everything just slightly wrong. Dad sent regular alimony checks and tried to see me when he could, but his business kept him busy. Our visits grew shorter and less frequent, always interrupted by urgent phone calls about meetings and deals. Then, when I was 8, my half-sister arrived. I still remember standing in the hospital hallway, watching through the glass as Mom cradled her new baby, with Steve beaming beside them. That was the moment I became invisible in my own home. They named her Lisa, and suddenly, everything revolved around her schedule, her needs, her wants. Rachel, keep it down, became Mom's favorite phrase. The baby's sleeping. Rachel, go to your room, Steve would say. Your mother needs to focus on the baby. Rachel, we can't help with your homework right now. Lisa has a fever. Rachel, eat dinner in your room tonight. Lisa's fussy and needs quiet. I grew up with a roof over my head and food on my plate, but love and warmth were luxuries I didn't get to experience. My bedroom became my sanctuary and my prison. I'd spend hours there, doing homework, reading books, or just staring at the ceiling, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. Steve made no secret of his dislike for me. He'd sigh heavily whenever I entered a room, or mutter under his breath about baggage from the past. Late at night, I'd hear them talking through the thin walls of my bedroom, their voices carrying clearly in the quiet house. "She should be living with her father," Steve would say. "She doesn't belong here. Look how she mopes around the house. She's making Lisa uncomfortable." "We can't send her away," Mom would reply in a harsh whisper. "Mark's alimony is too important. We need that money. Have you seen how much Lisa's dance classes cost? Besides, the mortgage." Those whispered conversations taught me everything I needed to know about my place in this family. I wasn't a daughter, I was a paycheck. A means to an end. A necessary inconvenience they tolerated for the monthly deposits my father made into their account. Every time I heard them talk like that, a little piece of my heart would harden, building up walls that would eventually become impenetrable. As I grew older, the distance between me and my mother's family grew into a canyon. Every summer vacation became a stark reminder of where I stood in their hierarchy. While they packed their bags for beach resorts and theme parks, I'd be shuttled off to Dad's place like an afterthought. "We just can't afford an extra ticket, Rachel," Mom would say, not quite meeting my eyes. "But you'll have fun with your father, won't you?" The truth was, I did have fun with Dad, even though our time together was punctuated by business calls and urgent meetings. He'd sit with me during breakfast, his phone constantly buzzing, looking at me with guilty eyes. "I'm sorry, Princess," he'd say for the 100th time. "The business is really taking off, and I need to be available. But look what I got you." And out would come the latest iPhone, or a new laptop, or the newest gaming console. I remember the day he gave me my first MacBook. His eyes lit up watching me open it. "This is for all those weekends I had to cancel," he said. "I know it doesn't make up for it, but..." "It's perfect, Dad," I told him, and I meant it. Not because of the expensive gift, but because of how his face brightened when I hugged him. But my happiness would always be short-lived. The moment I returned home with any new gadget, the storm would begin. "A MacBook?" Lisa would screech, her face turning red. "That's not fair. I want one too." She'd stomp her feet, tears streaming down her face, even though she was 8 years younger and barely knew how to use a computer. "Look what you've started," Mom would hiss at me, while Steve stood in the corner, arms crossed, glaring as if I'd committed a crime. The pattern was always the same. Lisa would throw a tantrum, Mom and Steve would pace around anxiously, and within a week, they'd cave and buy her the same thing. It didn't matter if she was too young for it or didn't need it, she had to have exactly what I had. One particularly bad episode involved an iPad Pro. Lisa's meltdown lasted 3 days straight. "I hate you," she screamed at me. "You always get better stuff. It's not fair." Mom finally snapped. I overheard her angry phone call to Dad that evening. "Mark, this has to stop," she demanded. "These expensive gifts are causing problems in my household. Lisa gets upset, and we can't afford to keep matching your presents. Either buy something for both girls or don't buy anything at all." The next weekend, Dad picked me up looking more serious than usual. We drove to our favorite diner, and over chocolate milkshakes, he broke the news. "Rachel, honey," he started, "your mom called me about the gifts." My heart sank. "I'm sorry, Dad. I don't mean to cause trouble." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. No, you haven't done anything wrong. But I think we need to be smarter about this. I won't be giving you any more expensive gadgets." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment, but then he smiled. Instead, he continued, lowering his voice, "I've opened a college fund for you. By the time you graduate high school, you'll be able to go to any university you want." My eyes widened. "Really? Really? But this has to be our secret, okay? Don't tell your mom or anyone else. This is just between us." I nodded eagerly, feeling for the first time like I had something truly mine, a future that nobody could take away or demand to share. The day I graduated high school should have been filled with celebration. Instead, just a week later, I found myself sitting at our dining table, pushing food around my plate while Mom cleared her throat. "Rachel," she said, setting down her fork. "Now that you've graduated, we need to discuss something important." I already knew what was coming. The way she'd been eyeing my room lately, the whispered conversations with Steve, it wasn't hard to guess. "Lisa needs her own space now that she's 10, Mom continued. "She's growing up, and your room would be perfect for her. It's time for you to move out." Steve nodded vigorously beside her, while Lisa bounced in her chair with excitement. I kept my face neutral, took a sip of water, and said, "Actually, I was planning to leave anyway. I'm going to college in the fall." Mom's eyebrows shot up. "College? We can't afford that, Rachel. You know our financial situation." "Dad's paying for it," I replied, watching their faces transform. The relief that washed over them was almost comical. Steve's shoulders relaxed, and Mom's tight smile loosened. "Oh," she said. "Well, that's good then." I spent the next day packing my life into boxes. The walls of my room, already bare from years of not being allowed to put up posters, "It'll damage the paint, Rachel," seemed to close in on me. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mom and Steve talking in their bedroom. Finally, Steve was saying, his voice gleeful, "No more dealing with Mark's daughter. And the alimony payments will stop too." "I know," Mom replied. "I was worried we'd have to keep her around longer." This worked out perfectly. Their words should have hurt, but I felt nothing but relief. 2 days later, I loaded the last box into Dad's car. Dad had taken a whole week off work, the first vacation he'd had in years, and surprised me with tickets to Hawaii. As our plane took off, I watched my hometown disappear beneath the clouds, feeling lighter with each mile we put between us and that house. "I thought we could use some father-daughter time before college starts," he said, squeezing my hand. For the first time in years, his phone stayed off. We spent our days on the beach, trying to surf, badly, eating at local restaurants, and talking, really talking, about everything and nothing. In the evenings, we'd sit on our hotel balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I'd never seen back home. One night, as we watched the waves crash against the shore, Dad turned to me. "I'm sorry it took me so long to do this," he said quietly. I leaned my head against his shoulder, breathing in the salt air and the faint scent of his aftershave. "You're here now," I replied. "That's what matters." College felt like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. I moved into my dorm room that fall, armed with determination and the knowledge that Dad had my back. But I wanted to stand on my own feet too, so I got a job at the campus cafe, the daily grind. "Rachel, you don't have to work," Dad insisted during one of our calls. "I can send you a monthly allowance." "I know, Dad, but I want to," I replied, balancing my phone while wiping down tables. "It feels good earning my own money." Between classes, study sessions, and work shifts, I built a life that was entirely my own. My coworkers became friends, my professors became mentors, and slowly, the weight of my past began to lift. I loved the rhythm of my new life, early morning study sessions before my first class, afternoon shifts at the cafe, and late nights in the library with my study group. Dad's business was booming, and he bought a beautiful house in a quiet suburb. During holidays, I'd stay with him, marveling at how peaceful life could be. We'd spend evenings in his home theater, or by the pool, and he'd tell me about his plans for the company's expansion. "I have something special planned for when you graduate," he'd say with a mysterious smile. "Dad, paying for my college is already more than enough," I'd protest, but he'd just shake his head and change the subject. Every time I visited, the house felt more like home. I had my own room there, decorated exactly how I wanted it, something I'd never been allowed in my mother's house. Dad even gave me a key, telling me I could come anytime, even when he was away on business trips. Meanwhile, my mother's world continued spinning without me in it. Her social media was a shrine to Lisa, dance recitals, school events, family vacations. Sometimes, relatives would comment on her posts. "How's Rachel doing? Haven't seen her in ages." Mom's replies were always the same: "Oh, she's doing well, living her adult life." As if I was some distant acquaintance she'd lost touch with, not her firstborn daughter. She had no idea I was making Dean's List every semester. Didn't know I'd been promoted to shift supervisor at the cafe. Couldn't tell you what I was majoring in or who my friends were. My life had become a fill-in-the-blank space in her story, and she seemed perfectly content to leave it empty. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of the opportunity Dad had given me. Between classes and work, I joined the business club and even started tutoring younger students in economics. My professors started talking about graduate school possibilities, and for the first time, I could see a clear path forward for my life. One day, scrolling through my feed, I saw a photo of Lisa's 12th birthday party. The house was decorated with balloons and streamers, and Mom had tagged every relative except me. "Our little princess is growing up so fast," the caption read, followed by a dozen heart emojis. I stared at the image for a long moment, then closed the app. That night, as I locked up the cafe, I realized I didn't feel the ache I expected. Instead, I felt light, unburdened, like I'd finally put down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for years. Graduation day was bright and sunny. I spotted Dad in the crowd immediately. He was the one cheering the loudest when they called my name. After the ceremony, while families took photos and celebrated, he pulled me aside with a mysterious smile. "Close your eyes and hold out your hands," he said. I felt something metal drop into my palm. Opening my eyes, I saw a set of keys with a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked, opening the envelope to find an address. "Your graduation present. An apartment in your name, back in hometown. Fully furnished and ready for you to move in." I burst into tears, throwing my arms around him. "Dad, this is too much." "Nothing's too much for my little girl," he said, hugging me tight. The apartment was perfect, modern, spacious, in a quiet neighborhood. I found a job at a local marketing firm, settled into a comfortable routine, and rarely thought about my mother's family anymore. Life was good, simple, peaceful. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "The tests came back positive," Dad said, his voice unusually quiet. "It's stage 3 pancreatic cancer." The next 2 years became a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and desperate searches for experimental treatments. I watched my strong, vibrant father grow weaker day by day. He fought hard, we both did, but cancer doesn't fight fair. On a rainy Tuesday morning, holding my hand, he took his last breath. He was just 54. I handled the funeral arrangements in a daze. Posted about it on social media, tagging Mom out of obligation more than hope. Her response came hours later. "Sorry, but I'm too busy to attend my ex-husband's funeral. Lisa has a dance recital that day." Even in my grief, I couldn't say I was surprised. The reading of the will left me speechless. Dad had left me everything: his company, the house, several investment properties. His lawyer handed me a letter. "Dear Rachel, I built all this for you, princess. I'm sorry I can't be there to see what you'll do with it, but I know it'll be something amazing. Take care of yourself first, then others if you can. Love, Dad." I hired Marcus Chen, Dad's trusted VP, to run the company as CEO. He had the experience I lacked, and I knew Dad would approve. Meanwhile, I found my own way to honor his memory, establishing a foundation to help cancer patients and their families. The day we launched the foundation, I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. "No one should fight cancer alone," I said, my voice steady, despite the tears in my eyes. "And thanks to the Mark Anderson Memorial Foundation, no one will have to." That night, alone in my apartment, I looked at Dad's photo on my desk. "I hope I'm making you proud," I whispered. The company was thriving, the foundation was helping people, and somehow, through all the grief, I was still standing. Maybe that's what he'd been preparing me for all along. My phone rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The name on the screen made my heart skip. Mom. After 9 years of silence, she was calling me. Rachel, can you come over? It's important. Her voice sounded different, strained, older. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Walking up to my old house felt surreal. Mom opened the door, and I barely recognized her. She'd aged dramatically, her face lined with pain. Steve hovered behind her, and there was Lisa, now 19, watching me with curious eyes. In the living room, nothing had changed, same furniture, same photos of Lisa everywhere. Mom lowered herself carefully into her chair, wincing. I need surgery, she said without preamble. Several surgeries, actually. My joints are deteriorating. Without treatment, I could end up immobile. She paused, wringing her hands. I heard about your inheritance from Mark. About the company, the properties. There it was, the real reason for the reunion. We can't afford the surgeries, Steve added, his pride clearly battling with desperation. The insurance won't cover enough. I studied my mother's face, the same face that had dismissed me, forgotten me, ignored me for years. The same woman who couldn't even attend my father's funeral. But underneath all that history, she was still my mother. I'll cover the medical bills, I heard myself say. Mom burst into tears, pulling me into an awkward hug, our first in years. Stay for dinner, she insisted. We have so much catching up to do. Dinner was a strange affair. Between bites, Mom and Steve peppered me with questions. So, how many properties did Mark leave you exactly? Is the company doing well? Are you selling any of the assets? I deflected each question with practiced ease. The estate is quite complicated, I'd say, or everything's in trusts and legal arrangements. Lisa watched this dance with sharp eyes, eerily similar to how I used to watch Mom and Steve's late-night conversations through the years. As I drove home that night, I wondered if I'd made the right decision. I had the means to help, and despite everything, some small part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The next day, I contacted the hospital to arrange payment for Mom's surgeries. Whatever happened next, at least I knew I'd done what Dad would have wanted, being better than the hurt I'd been given. The surgeries were successful. I paid each medical bill without question, and within months, Mom was walking normally again. That's when the invitations started coming. Rachel, come for Sunday dinner. Rachel, we're having a barbecue. Rachel, Lisa misses you. Each visit felt like walking on eggshells. Mom would reminisce about my childhood, conveniently editing out the painful parts. Steve would ask casual questions about Dad's company. Lisa would watch me with a mixture of expectation and something else I couldn't quite identify. We're finally a family again, Mom would say, reaching for my hand across the table. But I noticed how her eyes never quite met mine when she said it. When the invitation came for Lisa's 20th birthday party, I decided to make an effort. I bought her the latest iPhone, top model, all the bells and whistles. Maybe it was an attempt to bridge the gap between us, or maybe I just wanted to give her something I knew she'd like. The party was a small affair, just the four of us. No friends, no other relatives. Mom had insisted on keeping it intimate, though now I understood why. Lisa unwrapped the iPhone with barely concealed disappointment. Oh, thanks, she said flatly, setting it aside without even opening the box. She kept glancing at Mom, as if waiting for something. Then came dinner, and Mom cleared her throat in that way I remembered all too well from childhood, the sound that always preceded something unpleasant. Rachel, sweetheart, she began, her voice honey-sweet. The phone is lovely, but we were thinking you could give Lisa something more substantial. I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. What do you mean? Well, Mom continued, sharing a look with Steve, we know your father left you several properties. And Lisa's graduating from college soon. Wouldn't it be nice if she had her own place? You have so many apartments, surely you could spare one for your sister? The room went silent. Steve stared intently at his plate, while Lisa leaned forward, eyes bright with anticipation. This was clearly what they'd been building toward all along. I set down my fork carefully, trying to process what I was hearing. All those family dinners, the sudden interest in my life, the constant invitations, it had all been leading to this moment. "No," I said quietly. "I won't be giving away any of my properties." Mom's sweet expression faltered. "But Rachel, it's your sister. Surely your father would have wanted." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't you dare tell me what my father would have wanted." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Mom's face turned red with anger, while Lisa slumped in her chair, crossing her arms. "How dare you be so selfish?" Mom snapped. "Your sister deserves—" "No," I said again, standing up. "What I deserve is to not be used for my money. Not now, not ever." Mom's sweet facade shattered instantly. Her face contorted with rage as she slammed her hands on the table, making the dishes rattle. "You ungrateful little bitch," she screamed. "After everything we've done for you. You're just like your father, selfish and heartless." Lisa shrank back in her chair while Steve stood up, looming over the table. But I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. "Everything you've done for me?" I shot back, standing my ground. "Like throwing me out at 18 the moment Dad's alimony check stopped coming? Like treating me like an unwanted houseguest in my own home? You were never part of this family," Mom shrieked. "You were always in the way, always causing problems. And now you have all this money and won't help your own sister?" She lunged forward, hand raised to strike me. I caught her wrist midair. "Touch me," I said quietly, "and I'll go straight to the police. And then I'll sue you for every penny I spent on your surgeries." The color drained from her face. Steve took a step back. Lisa's mouth hung open. "You wouldn't dare," Mom whispered. "Try me. I'm not that powerless little girl anymore." I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, turning back one last time. "Don't call me again. Don't message me. Don't try to contact me through relatives. We're done." That was more than a year ago. Now I sit in my office, looking out over the city as another one of Mom's messages pops up on my phone. They started coming a week after that dinner, first angry, then pleading, then tearfully apologetic. "Please, Rachel, we're family. Your sister misses you. We can work this out." I block each new number, each fake social media account they create. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if I'm being too harsh, if I should give them another chance. But then I remember Dad's words from his letter, "Take care of yourself first." So that's what I'm doing. The company is thriving under Marcus's leadership. The Cancer Foundation is helping dozens of families. My life is full of meaning and purpose, built on the foundation of love that Dad provided. Yesterday, I received an invitation to Lisa's graduation. Inside was a handwritten note from Mom, "Please come. We can start over." I dropped it in the shredder without a second thought. Some people say blood is thicker than water, but the family you choose, the bonds you forge through love and trust, those are the ones that truly matter. My name is Sophia, and my childhood was filled with the kind of privilege most people only dream about. Our house was something straight out of a magazine, spacious rooms, manicured lawn, and a pool that hosted countless summer parties. My father's business success made it all possible, and he never let us forget it. "Sophia, honey, remember that everything we have comes from hard work," my dad would say, his voice carrying that familiar mix of pride and authority. I'd nod, trying to absorb the lesson, even though at that age, I was more interested in playing with my cousin Chloe than understanding the value of money. Ah, Chloe. She was practically my sister, even though technically she was my cousin. Just a year younger than me, she was the daughter of my father's younger brother, Uncle Mark. Our families were inseparable, though the contrast in our living situations was hard to miss. "Your uncle's family needs our support," my mom would explain whenever I noticed Dad helping them out financially. "Family takes care of family." She was always the diplomatic one, smoothing over any awkward moments when Uncle Mark would accept another check from Dad. Chloe and I shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams. We'd spend hours in my room, planning our futures. "We'll go to college together," Chloe would say, lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling. "And then we'll live in apartments next to each other, and our kids will be best friends too." When high school graduation approached, true to form, my father announced he'd pay for both our college educations. Mom stood beside him, beaming with pride as he made the announcement at our joint graduation party. "Both my girls deserve the best education possible," he declared, putting an arm around each of us. I remember how Chloe's eyes welled up with tears of gratitude, while I just smiled, taking it for granted. Looking back now, I should have noticed the signs. But back then, I was just happy to have my cousin/sister by my side as we packed our bags for college. We were going to take on the world together, two peas in a pod, never imagining that a wedding gift would eventually unravel everything we thought we knew about our perfect family. "This is going to be amazing," Chloe squealed as we decorated our dorm rooms, located conveniently across the hall from each other. "Nothing can ever come between us, right, Sophia?" "Nothing," I promised, meaning it with all my heart. God, how naive we were. How naive I was. But that's the thing about perfect families, sometimes they're perfect only because we choose not to look too closely at the cracks in the foundation. College flew by faster than I expected. Before I knew it, I was walking across the stage to receive my diploma, my family cheering from the audience. I felt on top of the world, armed with my degree. I quickly landed a job at a marketing firm. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Well, almost everything. "Dad, I've been thinking about getting my own place," I brought up one evening over dinner. I'd been browsing apartment listings online, dreaming of having my own space. "The rental market is crazy right now, and with a down payment." "Sophia," he cut me off, putting down his fork. "You're an independent woman now. You have a good job. It's time for you to earn your own living. Your mother and I gave you a great education, but now it's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet." Mom just sat there, nodding in agreement. I felt like I'd been slapped. So that's how I ended up in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, watching my savings grow at a painfully slow rate while half my paycheck went to rent. But I was determined to prove I could do it on my own. A year later, Chloe graduated. We celebrated at her favorite restaurant, and that's when she dropped her bombshell. "Jake proposed," she squealed, flashing a diamond ring. "We're getting married in 4 months." 4 months flew by in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. I threw myself into my maid of honor duties, helping Chloe pick out everything from her dress to the table settings. Despite my own housing struggles, I was genuinely happy for her. The wedding day arrived, and everything was perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, the reception elegant. I watched Chloe dance with Jake, both of them glowing with happiness. Then my father stood up to make his speech. "Chloe," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been like a daughter to me all these years. Watching you grow up alongside Sophia has been one of life's greatest joys." I smiled, sipping my champagne. Standard wedding speech stuff. But then, "That's why," he continued, pulling out an envelope, "I want to give you something special. Something to start your new life together." He paused for dramatic effect. "The keys to your very own apartment." The glass nearly slipped from my hand. The room erupted in gasps and applause. Uncle Mark and Aunt Sarah were crying. Chloe rushed to hug my father, sobbing thank yous into his shoulder. "You deserve this," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I love you like my own daughter." I sat there, frozen, as relatives crowded around Chloe and Jake, congratulating them on their incredible gift. My mind was spinning. The same father who told me to stand on my own 2 feet had just handed my cousin an apartment. I gripped my champagne glass so hard I thought it might shatter. But I kept smiling. Kept playing my part. This was Chloe's day, after all. I wouldn't make a scene. I waited exactly 3 days after the wedding before I showed up at my parents' house. My hands were shaking as I rang the doorbell, but my voice was steady when Dad opened the door. "We need to talk," I said, walking past him into the familiar living room where I'd spent so many happy moments. "What's on your mind, Sophia?" He settled into his favorite armchair, looking perfectly calm, as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb on my life. "Really? You're going to pretend you don't know?" I stayed standing, too agitated to sit. "You told me to earn my own living, to stand on my own feet. But you just handed Chloe an apartment like it was nothing. Want to explain that?" Dad sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "It's different with Chloe. She doesn't have the same opportunities you do." "Different how?" "We went to the same college, got the same education, which you paid for, by the way. She comes from a poor family, Sophia. Jake's family isn't well off either. Your uncle can't afford to help them get started in life." He leaned forward. "At today's prices, they'd never be able to save enough for their own place." I let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, and I can? Half the country rents, Dad. They could have done what I'm doing, work, save, rent an apartment like normal people." "You're being mercantile," he snapped, his calm facade cracking. "This isn't about you. This is my money, and I decide how to spend it. I help your uncle's family because they need it." "Mercantile?" My voice rose. "This isn't about money, it's about fairness. How do you think it feels to watch you treat your niece better than your own daughter?" "That's enough." Mom burst into the room. I hadn't even realized she was home. "How dare you question your father's decisions? You have no right to tell him how to spend his money." "Oh, so you're okay with this?" I turned to her. "Your husband giving another woman's daughter an apartment while telling his own to struggle? Don't you take that tone with me, young lady." Mom's face was red with anger. "Your father has provided everything for you, and this is how you repay him? With jealousy and demands?" "Jealousy?" I was practically shouting now. "You think this is about jealousy? This is about respect. About treating your own child with the same consideration you show to others. Get out." Dad's voice was cold. "Until you can appreciate everything we've done for you, and apologize for this behavior, get out of my house." Gladly, I grabbed my purse. "And don't worry about doing anything else for me. I wouldn't want your charity." My eyes were burning with angry tears as I got into my car. It wasn't about the money, it never had been. It was about the double standard, about watching my father bend over backward for Chloe while telling me to toughen up. 5 years can change a lot of things. In my case, they changed almost everything. I built my career, rising through the ranks at my marketing firm to become a senior account manager. I saved money diligently, though nowhere near enough for a down payment in this insane market, and most importantly, I found Michael. He walked into my life during a client meeting. He was the creative director we were partnering with, and something just clicked. The moment he proposed, on a random Tuesday evening while we were cooking dinner together, I knew I'd finally found someone who truly put me first. The wedding planning started immediately. Our date was set for early summer, and I threw myself into it with the same determination I brought to everything else in my life. The venue was booked, the dress was chosen, and then came the hardest part, the guest list. I spent hours at my kitchen table, staring at names and relationships, though it wasn't hard to decide who wouldn't be on it. I hadn't spoken to my parents or Chloe in 5 years, not since Chloe's nasty message on Facebook. "You're just jealous, because I have a husband and an apartment while you have neither. Grow up, Sophia. Maybe if you weren't so entitled, you'd have both by now. But I guess some people just can't handle seeing others succeed." I'd blocked her after that. It was easier that way, cleaner. I built a new life, surrounded myself with people who valued me, and tried to forget about the family that had made me feel like a second-class daughter. But word travels fast in families, even broken ones. I was sitting in my apartment, reviewing floral arrangements and debating between roses and peonies, when my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen, the first time in 5 years. My heart jumped into my throat, and my hand shook as I answered. Sophia, his voice sounded older somehow, more tired. I hear congratulations are in order. Who told you? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Does it matter? Why didn't you invite me to your wedding? He paused, and I could hear the hurt in his voice. I'm your father. I should be the one walking you down the aisle. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Really? Now you want to play the father card? Sophia. Actually, I'm curious, I cut him off, feeling reckless. Something about hearing his voice had unleashed all the emotions I'd kept carefully contained for 5 years. Will you be giving me an apartment as a wedding gift? You know, like you did for Chloe? The silence on the other end stretched out so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he cleared his throat. Look, sweetheart, business hasn't been great lately. I can give you $5,000 for the wedding. That's a generous gift. You should be grateful. $5,000. After giving Chloe a whole apartment. I felt that old familiar burn of indignation rising in my throat. Some things, it seemed, never changed. Thanks for your generosity, Dad, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. But keep your money, I don't need it. The line went dead before he could respond. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling slightly, wondering if that 5-year silence had been better than this reminder of why I'd cut contact in the first place. The notification popped up on my phone the next morning. Robert Anderson has shared a post. My father rarely posted on social media, so seeing his name alone made my stomach clench. When I opened it, my hand started shaking. I never thought I'd have to write something like this about my own daughter, the post began. But Sophia has shown her true colors. She's demanding an apartment as a wedding gift, threatening not to invite me to her wedding unless I comply. The selfishness and mercenary attitude she's displaying breaks my heart. What happened to the daughter I raised? The comments started rolling in immediately. Aunt Linda, how ungrateful can she be? Cousin James, some people never appreciate what they have. Even people I barely knew were weighing in, you can't demand gifts like that. What kind of daughter blackmails her own father? My fingers flew across the keyboard before I could stop myself, a matter of principle? You gave my cousin an apartment for her wedding. Your own daughter deserves the same consideration, or at least an explanation for the difference in treatment. But the comments kept coming, each one more judgmental than the last. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but something had snapped inside me. I opened a new post and started writing. Let me tell you all a story that's been bothering me for years, I began. It's about a father who has always treated his niece better than his own daughter. Let me list the ways. Every birthday, Chloe got lavish parties, while mine were simple family gatherings. When we went on family trips abroad, Dad always took Chloe shopping separately, buying her extras I never got. Her pocket money was consistently double mine. Dad paid for her education, which I appreciate he did for both of us. He gave her an apartment as a wedding gift, while telling me to stand on my own feet. At Chloe's wedding, she had her first dance with my father instead of her own. And you know what? The more I think about it, the more suspicious this whole situation seems. I wouldn't even be surprised if it turned out Chloe was actually my father's daughter. I hit post before I could second guess myself. The words stared back at me from the screen, a nuclear bomb dropped into the middle of our family's carefully maintained facade. There would be no taking it back now. The aftermath of my post was nuclear. Within hours, my phone was blowing up with calls and messages from every corner of the family. Some relatives immediately announced they wouldn't be attending my wedding. Mom called first, her voice shrill with anger. How could you? Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? Your father is devastated. We raised you better than this. Dad's call came next, a stream of rage and accusations about how I was destroying the family name. You're dead to me, he spat before hanging up. Aunt Sarah's call was particularly venomous. "You vindictive little bitch," she hissed. "How dare you suggest? You're just jealous of my daughter's happiness." Then came Chloe's message: "Congratulations on proving what a hysterical, paranoid person you've become. I feel sorry for your fiancé. He's marrying a delusional woman who invents sick stories about her own family because she can't handle not being the center of attention. Don't worry about blocking me, I'll do it myself." I quietly blocked everyone who'd left nasty comments or messages. My wedding guest list got significantly shorter, but I told myself it was for the best. Only Uncle Mark remained silent throughout the whole ordeal, which I found oddly comforting amid the chaos. The next 2 months were a blur of wedding preparations. Michael was my rock through it all, never questioning my decision to cut off my family, supporting me as I revised seating charts and canceled place settings. Then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. Uncle Mark stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. "We need to talk." I'd never seen my uncle look so broken. He sat heavily on my couch, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles were white. "Your post," he began, "about your father's treatment of Chloe, it made me start thinking. Really thinking about everything. And remembering." He told me about the early years of his marriage, how my father was always around their house. He'd drive Sarah home from work, saying it wasn't safe for her to take the bus. This was even before she was pregnant with Chloe. He was always bringing her gifts, expensive ones. I thought, God, I was such a fool. I thought he was just being a generous brother. Uncle Mark's voice cracked. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope with trembling hands. "I had to know. After your post, I just had to know." The DNA test results were printed on official laboratory letterhead. My uncle had collected hair samples from all 3 of them, himself, Chloe, and my father. The results were unequivocal. Uncle Mark's genetic match to Chloe showed only an uncle's relationship, 84%, while my father showed a 99.99% paternal match. "Sarah confessed everything today," he whispered. 25 years. They've been having an affair for 25 years. Since before Chloe was even conceived. We sat there until well past midnight, piecing together memories that suddenly made horrifying sense. The special treatment, the excessive gifts, the way my father always seemed to know about Chloe's life before anyone else. All those times he'd insisted on driving Aunt Sarah to doctor's appointments when she was pregnant. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," Uncle Mark said as he was leaving. "I should have seen it. Should have known." I watched him walk to his car in the rain, his shoulders hunched with the weight of 2 decades of betrayal. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt no satisfaction in being right. The morning after Uncle Mark's visit changed everything. I was still processing our conversation when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Sophia, your uncle just left. We need to talk. Can you meet me at Rosemary's Cafe in an hour?" I found her already there, sitting in a corner booth, looking like she hadn't slept. Her hands were wrapped around an untouched cup of coffee, and I noticed they were shaking slightly. "I've filed for divorce," she said before I could even sit down. "I just came from the lawyer's office." Her voice cracked. 25 years of marriage, and I never knew. Never wanted to know, maybe. Uncle Mark had told her everything, the DNA test results, Aunt Sarah's confession, the decades-long affair. He'd filed for divorce too, unable to stay married to a woman who'd lived such a profound lie. "Sophia," Mom reached across the table and grabbed my hands. Her eyes were brimming with tears. "I owe you the biggest apology. All these years, I defended him. I sided with him. I watched him favor Chloe and told myself it was nothing. I should have listened to you. Should have seen what was happening in my own home." "Mom." "No, let me finish. When you posted about your suspicions, I was so angry. I thought you were trying to hurt us, trying to get revenge. But you were the only one brave enough to say what we all should have seen. We spent hours in that cafe, crying, talking, beginning the slow process of healing. Mom ordered a bottle of wine, and we shared it as she told me about all the signs she'd ignored over the years, all the moments that suddenly made terrible sense. Later that evening, I was at home trying to process everything that had happened when someone started pounding on my door. I opened it to find Dad standing there, his face purple with rage. "Are you happy now?" he shouted, pushing past me into my apartment. "You've destroyed everything. 2 families, destroyed because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." "I destroyed nothing," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice was. "You did this. 25 years ago, you made a choice that would destroy these families. I just exposed the truth." His face twisted. "Well, I won't be at your wedding." "How's that for truth?" "I wasn't planning to invite you," I said quietly. "You haven't been a real father to me in years." "Then it's settled," he snarled. "You're no longer my daughter." A strange calm settled over me. "That's fine," I smiled. "You have another daughter anyway, don't you?" The look of shock on his face was almost comical. Before he could respond, I opened the door and gestured for him to leave. When he did, I closed it firmly behind him, leaving him standing in the hallway. That evening, I called Uncle Mark. My hands were trembling slightly as I dialed his number. "Uncle Mark, I have something to ask you." I took a deep breath. "Would you walk me down the aisle at my wedding?" There was a long pause, and I heard him clear his throat several times before he could speak. "Sophia, I would be honored." 2 months passed in a blur of wedding preparations. The guest list was shorter than originally planned, but somehow that made it more special. Every person who attended had chosen truth over comfortable lies, had stood by me when it would have been easier to look the other way. The garden venue was beautiful, scattered with white roses and peonies. Mom sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When Uncle Mark took my arm to walk me down the aisle, I saw tears in his eyes too. The divorce proceedings between my parents moved surprisingly quickly. Mom told me later that Dad agreed to everything just to get it over with, perhaps hoping to minimize the scandal. They settled out of court, and Mom received a $200,000 settlement. I was in my rented apartment, surrounded by wedding thank you cards I was writing, when Mom came to visit one afternoon. "I want you to have this," she said, sliding an envelope across my coffee table. Inside was a check for the full settlement amount. "I don't need this money. What I need is for my daughter to have the home she deserves." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Consider it compensation for all the years I failed to stand up for you." "You didn't fail." "I did, but we're fixing things now." She smiled. "Besides, what better way to use his money than to finally give you what he should have given you years ago?" I won't pretend I didn't cry when I deposited that check. Or when Michael and I found the perfect apartment, a beautiful 3-bedroom with a balcony and enough space to start the family we're hoping for. Every time I unlock our front door, I feel a sense of justice being served. Dad and Aunt Sarah got married last month. I heard about it through the family grapevine. Apparently, they didn't even wait for the ink to dry on their respective divorce papers. They're not hiding their relationship anymore. Their social media is full of happy couples photos, as if the past 25 years of deception never happened. I don't follow their accounts. I don't need to. Most of our relatives sided with Mom and me once the DNA results became public knowledge. Even those who initially defended Dad couldn't ignore the evidence. Uncle Mark comes over for dinner every Sunday now. He's dating again, tentatively stepping back into life after the betrayal. Mom joins us often, and watching them heal together, sister-in-law and brother-in-law bonded by shared pain, has been beautiful. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Chloe. About the fact that she's technically my half-sister. I wonder if she knew, if she ever suspected the truth behind our father's favoritism. But those thoughts don't keep me awake anymore. I have my own life now, my own home, my own family, built on honesty instead of secrets. I never wanted to join the family business. After graduating from college with honors in financial management, my dreams were set on making my own mark in the corporate world. Several prestigious companies had already shown interest in my resume, and I was excited about building my career from scratch. But life had other plans. My name is Alice Chen, and I was always the responsible one, while my older brother Tommy was the golden child who could do no wrong. He got the newest gadgets, the fanciest clothes, and most importantly, our parents' undivided attention. I learned early on to be self-sufficient, throwing myself into studies and working part-time at our company during summers to earn my own money. Chen Global Trading had been in our family for 3 generations. My great-grandfather started it with just 2 shipping containers of electronics from Taiwan. By the time my father took over, it had grown into a respectable mid-sized company handling imports from all across Asia. I knew the business inside and out from my summer jobs, but I never thought I'd end up running it. That was supposed to be Tommy's destiny. "Alice, we need to talk," my father said one evening, his voice unusually serious. I had just finished telling him about a promising interview with Goldman Sachs over dinner at his office. "What's wrong, Dad?" He gestured for me to sit down, his face lined with worry. "The company, it's not doing well. We're losing money faster than ever before." I felt my stomach tighten. I thought Tommy was learning the ropes? "You always said he'd take over." Dad's face flushed with embarrassment. "Your brother, he's not ready." Yesterday, he expense reported a $5,000 dinner with clients at that new French restaurant. When I asked him about the business discussed, he couldn't remember a single detail. "And what does this have to do with me?" I asked, although I was beginning to see where this was going. "I need you to take over as CEO," he said simply. "You're smart, responsible, and you know the business. The company needs you, Alice." I sat there, stunned. For years, I'd been told this was Tommy's birthright. Now suddenly, because he couldn't handle it, they wanted me to step in and fix everything? What about my own career plans? I protested. "I've worked hard for this, Dad. I have interviews lined up." "This is our family's legacy," he interrupted, his voice cracking slightly. "Your great-grandfather built this company from nothing. Are you really going to let it fail?" I looked at the old black and white photo on his wall, my great-grandfather standing proudly in front of his first warehouse. The weight of 3 generations of family history pressed down on my shoulders. "Tommy won't like this," I said finally. Dad sighed. "Let me handle your brother. Will you do it?" I stared out the window at the city skyline, watching my carefully planned future slip away. "Yes," I heard myself say. "I'll do it." My first day as CEO of Chen Global Trading felt surreal. Walking through the familiar hallways, I was greeted by faces I'd known since I was a teenager running errands and filing paperwork during summer breaks. I spent the next 2 weeks buried in financial reports, my financial management degree finally proving useful in ways I hadn't expected. Mrs. Rodriguez, our head of accounting, and her team were invaluable, providing me with years of records and explaining various accounting practices that had become standard under my brother's influence. "I hate to show you this," Mrs. Rodriguez said one evening, placing a thick folder on my desk. "But you need to see where the money's really going." The numbers told a story of systematic mismanagement and wasteful spending. But it was when I started digging into the expense reports that my blood really began to boil. The documents revealed a pattern of excessive spending that made my stomach turn. An $80,000 Tesla Model S purchased 6 months ago under transportation expenses. A $12,000 monthly rent for a penthouse apartment in downtown, listed as client entertainment facilities. A $25,000 shopping spree at Armani, somehow classified as professional development expenses. "Has my father seen these reports?" I asked Mrs. Rodriguez. She shook her head. "Tommy always had a way of presenting things differently to your father." More vaguely. The details got buried in broader categories. I stayed late into the night, poring over every detail. The more I looked, the more I found. Weekend trips to Vegas labeled as client relationship building. Designer suits and watches filed under professional image maintenance. The company was bleeding money through 1,000 expensive cuts, all traced back to my brother's spending habits. By the end of my audit, I had made my decision. I drafted a new company expense policy, one that would eliminate all these excessive privileges. Everyone, including Tommy and myself, would operate on base salary alone. No more luxury cars, no more penthouse apartments, no more shopping sprees disguised as business expenses. As I finished typing the last page of the new policy, I glanced at the old black and white photo of my great-grandfather on the wall. "I'm going to fix this," I promised him silently. "Whatever it takes." I knew the storm that was coming. Tommy wouldn't take these changes lying down. But I had the numbers, the documentation, and most importantly, the authority to make these necessary changes. Let him try to justify $1,200 swimming trunks as a business expense to my face. I was reviewing supplier contracts when my office door burst open with such force that it bounced off the wall. Tommy stormed in, his face red with rage, waving a copy of the new expense policy I distributed that morning. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, slamming the document onto my desk. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything away from me?" I kept my voice steady. "These are necessary changes to save the company, Tommy." "Bullshit. You've always been jealous of me. Always trying to prove you're better than me. And now you're using Dad's temporary insanity to push me out." "No one is pushing you out," I said. "But the company can't afford to bankroll your lifestyle anymore." "My lifestyle?" He laughed bitterly. "I bring in half our clients. You think they want to meet in some cheap restaurant? Drive around in a Toyota? They want to do business with a solvent company," I countered. "Which we won't be if." "Screw you, Alice." He kicked my visitor's chair across the room. "You're nothing but a jealous bitch who couldn't stand seeing me succeed. I'm calling Dad." He stormed out, leaving papers scattered across my floor. I knew exactly where this was heading. Sure enough, that Saturday at our family dinner, I could feel the tension as soon as I walked in. Mom was unusually quiet as she served the pot roast, and Dad kept clearing his throat, his nervous tell. Finally, Mom couldn't hold back anymore. "Alice, don't you think you're being a little harsh with your brother? He's worked so hard for the company." "Has he?" I reached for my briefcase. I'd come prepared for this. "Would you like to see exactly how Tommy's been working hard with company money?" I spread out the documents across the dining table, right next to Mom's best china. Credit card statements, expense reports, receipts, all carefully highlighted and annotated. This is the penthouse he rented with company funds. This is the Tesla he bought. Here are the Vegas trips, the designer shopping sprees, the $1,000 dinners. Mom shook her head. "He needs to entertain clients." "With $1,200 swimming trunks?" I pointed to that particular receipt. "With a $15,000 watch." "Your brother has always had good instincts for business," Mom insisted. "He knows how to make people feel special." Dad had been silent, studying the documents with a deepening frown. "These numbers," he finally said. "Tommy, is this accurate?" Tommy, who'd been sulking at the other end of the table, shrugged. "It's all legitimate business expenses. Alice is just too rigid to understand how modern business works." "That's enough," Dad cut in. He looked tired, older somehow. "Alice is right about the expenses, Tommy. They need to stop." He held up his hand when Tommy tried to protest. "But she's also going to help you learn to run the company properly." I blinked in surprise. "I am?" Dad nodded. "My plan is to eventually split the company between you two. 50-50. But that only works if you both know how to manage it." He looked at me pleadingly. "Will you teach him?" I looked at Tommy, who was staring at his plate, jaw clenched. Teaching him would be like teaching a cat to swim. But I heard myself saying, "Yes, I'll try." Looking at Tommy across the conference room table, I couldn't help but think about our childhood. While I was doing homework, He was racing his friends in the Porsche he got for his 16th birthday. When I spent summers learning the business, he was partying in the Hamptons. Mom and Dad always said he was living life to the fullest, while I was too serious. I remember the Christmas when I asked for accounting software to practice with, and they got me a sweater. Tommy got a jet ski. When I made honor roll, they nodded absently. When Tommy managed to graduate with C's, they threw a massive party. It wasn't that they didn't love me, they just loved him more obviously, more demonstratively, more completely. Now, watching him slouch in his expensive chair during our budget meeting, I saw the results of that upbringing. "Tommy, are you following these quarterly projections?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. He glanced up from his phone. Yeah. Numbers going up is good, numbers going down is bad. Can we wrap this up?" "It's a bit more complex than that," I said. "These projections affect our inventory decisions for the next 6 months." He sighed dramatically, but put his phone down. Small victories. I made sure to invite him to every important meeting. Client negotiations, supplier contracts, strategy sessions. If it mattered to the company, I wanted him there. Most of the time, he just sat there looking bored, checking his watch or playing with his pen. But occasionally, he'd surprise me. "Why don't we try importing luxury pet products?" he suggested during one meeting. "Rich people are crazy about their dogs these days. We could mark up the prices like crazy." "The market's already saturated," I explained gently. "And the certification process for pet products is complicated. Another time, we should invest everything in cryptocurrency. My friend made millions last month." I had to take a deep breath before responding to that one. We need more stable investments for company funds. His ideas were usually impractical or too risky, but at least he was thinking about the business. It was more engagement than I'd seen from him in years. During a meeting with our biggest client, he actually paid attention the whole time. Afterward, he said, "You know, you're pretty good at this. The way you handled their pricing concerns." It was probably the first genuine compliment he'd ever given me. "Thanks, Tommy. Want to grab lunch and I can explain the negotiation strategy one used?" "Nah, got plans," he said, already heading for the door. "But maybe next time." I watched him go, thinking about how patterns set in childhood become the architecture of our adult lives. Tommy never had to try because everything was handed to him. I always had to try twice as hard because nothing was. Now I was supposed to teach him what I'd spent years learning on my own. 8 years. 8 years of early mornings and late nights. 8 years of tough decisions and careful management. 8 years of teaching Tommy everything I knew, while simultaneously running the company at peak performance. The numbers told the story better than I could. Profits up 300% since I took over, 5 new branches opened across the state, a client list that had tripled in size. Chin Global Trading wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving. Dad's 70th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration of all that success. The private room at Golden Palace Restaurant was packed with family, close friends, and our most important business partners. The same faces who'd watched our company grow from near bankruptcy to industry leader. I'd helped Mom plan every detail, from the traditional red decorations to Dad's favorite 8-course menu. Even Tommy had shown up on time, for once. He'd been unusually quiet lately, but I figured he was just nervous about his presentation of our latest expansion plans. After the Peking duck was served, Dad stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon. The room fell silent. "I have an important announcement," he said, smiling at all of us. "After much thought, I've decided it's time for me to fully retire." There were murmurs of appreciation around the room. Dad had been semi-retired for years, ever since he made me CEO, but he still kept an office and came in for major decisions. And so, he continued, "It's time to talk about succession. About legacy." My stomach tightened, something in his voice. Chin Global Trading has been in our family for 3 generations, passed down from father to son. Today, I'm proud to announce that I'm transferring full ownership of the company to Tommy. The room erupted in applause. I sat there, frozen, as relatives congratulated my brother. This couldn't be happening. Dad, I said, standing up. My voice cut through the celebrations. What about our agreement? You promised to split the company between us. The room went quiet. Dad shrugged, not quite meeting my eyes. The company has always passed through the male line, Alice. It's tradition. Besides, Tommy will make an excellent leader. Leader? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm the one who saved this company. I'm the one who turned it around. Now, dear, Mom, cut in, don't make a scene. Tommy has natural leadership abilities. He'll make a better owner than. Better? I laughed incredulously. Where was his natural leadership when the company was failing? Where was it during the 8 years I spent teaching him basic business concepts? Tommy stood up, straightening his tie. Speaking of which, sis, you should start preparing to hand over your CEO duties. As the new owner, I'll be taking that position as well. He smirked at me across the table, the same smirk he'd had when he got that Porsche for his 16th birthday, when he took credit for my work in high school, when he spent company money like water because he knew he'd never face consequences. You know what? I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. You all deserve each other. 8 years I spent fixing Dad's mistakes and covering Tommy's incompetence. 8 years of my life sacrificed for this family's legacy. Alice, Mom gasped. How dare you be so selfish? Selfish? I turned to face her. Was I being selfish when I worked 60-hour weeks to save the company? When I gave up my own career dreams? When I tried to teach Tommy, despite knowing he'd never learn? You're just envious, Dad said coldly. You've always been jealous of your brother. Get out, Mom said, pointing to the door. If you can't be happy for your brother's success, you can leave. I looked around the room at my relatives' uncomfortable faces, at the business partners who wouldn't meet my eyes, at my family's expressions of righteous indignation. Gladly. The next morning, I walked into the office one last time to clear out my desk. Tommy was there, feet up on his new desk, my old desk, watching me pack. Don't forget to leave your keys, he smirked. I dropped my resignation letter on his desk, without a word. 8 years of my life packed into one cardboard box. Thankfully, I'd always lived well below my means. The savings I'd accumulated bought me a beautiful apartment in the historic district. I decided to take a few months off, something I hadn't done since college. The first signs of trouble at Chin Global Trading started 3 months later. Mrs. Rodriguez called me over coffee. They fired me, she said, hands wrapped around her cup. Tommy said I was too old school in my accounting practices. Over the next few weeks, more calls came. Tommy had replaced most of the senior management with his college buddies. The new CFO was a guy he used to party with who'd barely passed business school. He's back to his old spending habits, reported James, my former VP of operations, who'd also been let go. Bought himself a new Maserati as a company car. But that's not the worst part. The worst part, as it turned out, was Tommy's solution to their first major crisis. When their main supplier raised prices, instead of negotiating or finding a reputable alternative, Tommy switched to a sketchy supplier offering suspiciously low prices. The products are garbage, Sarah from Quality Control told me before she too was fired. Half of them are defective, but Tommy won't listen. Says we're being too picky. Within 6 months, the company had lost 3 major clients. Within 8 months, most of our long-term partners had jumped ship. The carefully built reputation I'd spent 8 years cultivating was crumbling in a matter of months. I heard it all through the grapevine, and I felt absolutely nothing. 1 year to the day after that fateful birthday dinner, my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but some remnant of daughterly duty made me pick up. Alice? His voice sounded older, tired. We need to talk. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. Tommy, he hasn't worked out as we hoped. He cleared his throat. The company's in trouble. Real trouble. I'm aware, I said flatly. The business community isn't that big. I'd heard about their latest disasters through my professional network. We need you back, he said. You can name your terms. Full control, whatever salary you want. Tommy will step aside. I couldn't help but laugh. Now you want me back? After you threw away 8 years of my work because of tradition? This is our family's legacy, Alice. Your great-grandfather's company. You can't just let it die. My great-grandfather's company died the day you chose your son's ego over your daughter's competence, I replied. The company I built for 8 years, that's what's dying now. And I don't care. How can you say that? His voice rose. This is your family's business. Your heritage. You have a responsibility. No, Dad, I don't. Not anymore. You made your choice a year ago. Now you can live with it. Alice, please. I hung up and blocked his number. Then I blocked Mom's number too, for good measure. Looking out my office window at the Manhattan skyline, I smiled. My new business card read Alice Chen, Chief Executive Officer of Morton International, one of the largest import-export firms on the East Coast. I'd been headhunted for the position 6 months ago. Alice? My assistant poked her head in. The board members are ready for your presentation. I gathered my papers, straightening my jacket. The quarterly results were excellent, we'd exceeded all projections, and I had plans to expand into 3 new markets. Your strategy for the Asian markets is brilliant, Richard Morton, the company owner, had told me last week. Best decision I ever made, bringing you on board. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, doing exactly what I'd always wanted to do, being valued for exactly who I was. No family drama, no emotional manipulation, no brothers to babysit. Just pure business, run well. News travels fast in family circles, even when you've cut off direct contact. It was my cousin Jennifer who told me over lunch, exactly 2 years after I'd walked out of Golden Palace restaurant. They've filed for bankruptcy, she said, stirring her coffee. Tommy had to sell everything, the house, the Maserati, even that ridiculous watch collection of his. I took a sip of my wine, letting the information settle. And? He's moved back in with Aunt Linda and Uncle James. They converted their home office into a bedroom for him. Jennifer hesitated. They're saying it's temporary, just until he gets back on his feet. I could picture it perfectly, Tommy in his childhood bedroom, Mom making his favorite meals, Dad making excuses for him. Some patterns really do never change. The details emerged over the following weeks through various family channels. The company's collapse had been spectacular, not just a failure, but a cautionary tale that would be whispered about in business circles for years to come. The defective products had led to lawsuits. The mismanaged funds had led to debt. The alienated partners had led to isolation. Everything I'd built over 8 years had been dismantled in less than 2, leaving nothing but debts and broken relationships. Your father had to remortgage their house to cover some of the debts, my Aunt Maria reported during our monthly phone call. They're saying you could have prevented this if you'd come back when they asked. I laughed at that, actually laughed out loud in my corner office overlooking Central Park. Morton International had just posted its best quarter in company history under my leadership. The Wall Street Journal had run a profile on me last month, praising my innovative approach to international trade relationships. They're still not getting it, are they? I said to Maria. This isn't about me abandoning them. This is about them never truly valuing what they had. Later that evening, I sat on my penthouse balcony, bought with my own money, earned through my own merit, watching the sunset over the city. I thought about Tommy, back in our parents' house, probably still blaming everyone but himself for what happened. I thought about Dad, who chose tradition over talent, and Mom, who chose favoritism over fairness. I thought about that old black and white photo of my great-grandfather that used to hang in the office. I wondered if they'd managed to save it from the liquidators, or if it had been sold along with everything else. A notification popped up on my phone, another glowing review of our company's performance under my leadership. The headline read, "Morton International CEO transforms company culture, a new era of growth." Should I feel guilty? That's what they all expect, the relatives who still talk to me, the old family friends who whisper about the prodigal daughter who let her family's legacy die. They think I should be torn up inside, haunted by what happened. But I'm not. Because here's the truth about legacies, they're not about buildings, or brand names, or even family traditions. They're about values. My great-grandfather built his company on hard work, integrity, and genuine business acumen. Those values didn't die with Chen Global Trading, they lived on through me, just in a different form. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when my life split into before and after. I was 16 when my parents sat me down in our small living room and told me they were getting divorced. No drama, no screaming matches, just two people who'd fallen out of love and wanted different things in life. I remember being surprisingly okay with it. Maybe because they handled it so maturely, or maybe because I'd seen it coming in the small ways, fewer family dinners, parallel lives under one roof. Dad moved into a nice apartment across town, and I spent every other weekend with him. We'd order pizza and watch bad sci-fi movies, just like we always had. But then Mom met Robert. Just a year after the divorce, she came home practically floating. "Lucy, I've met someone special," she announced over breakfast. "He's got a daughter about 10 years old. Wouldn't it be nice to have a sister?" I forced a smile and pushed my cereal around the bowl. "Great, Mom. Really great." Within months, they were married, and Robert and his daughter Sarah moved into our house. That's when the trouble started. Sarah, with her designer clothes and perfect little girl curls, looked like an angel in front of the adults. But the moment they turned away, she was a different person. It started small, my favorite sweater somehow ending up in the washing machine with red socks, my homework mysteriously getting coffee stains. Robert wasn't much better. He'd make little comments, always just on the edge of rude. "Lucy, don't you think that skirt's a bit short for school?" he'd say, or "maybe if you spent less time on the phone and more time studying, your grades would be better." I tried to tell Mom, but she'd just say, "He's just protective, honey. He wants what's best for you." Then came the research project incident. I'd spent weeks working on it, interviews, data collection, everything. I came home from school early one day and found Sarah in my room, her hands stained green from the markers she'd used to destroy my work. Pages and pages of research, ruined. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, grabbing her by the collar of her expensive little cardigan. "Nothing," she squealed, but the evidence was all over her hands. I dragged her downstairs to where Mom and Robert were watching TV. "Look at her hands," I shouted, pointing at the green stains. "Look what she did to my research project." Robert jumped up, his face turning red. "Get your hands off my daughter. She destroyed my work. Weeks of work." "You little fool," Robert snarled, stepping toward me. "How dare you manhandle my Sarah? She's just a child." I looked at Mom, waiting for her to defend me, to say something, anything. But she just sat there, shaking her head disapprovingly. At me. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Mom's silence over and over in my head. By morning, I'd made my decision. I started packing before sunrise, throwing clothes and books into bags, not even caring if they were folded. Dad picked up on the first ring. "Lucy, what's wrong? Can I come live with you?" My voice cracked. "Please?" "Of course, sweetheart. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Dad's truck pulled up, Robert was already at work, and Sarah was at school. Mom stood in the doorway, watching me load my bags. "Lucy, don't do this," she said. "You're overreacting." Overreacting? I turned to face her. Your husband called me a fool, and you just sat there. Your stepdaughter destroyed my work, and you did nothing. Dad must have heard, because his face darkened. What's this about Robert calling my daughter names? After I told him everything, he was livid. He marched straight to Robert's workplace. I stayed in the truck, but I could see them through the window of Robert's office, Dad pointing, Robert standing up, faces red, fingers jabbing. Security had to separate them before punches were thrown. Living with Dad was like breathing fresh air after being underwater. No more walking on eggshells, no more checking my room for sabotage. He helped me redo my research project, staying up late with me, bringing me coffee and snacks. Mom sent me a message a few days later. I can't believe you set your father against Robert like this. You're tearing this family apart. I didn't bother responding. What family was she talking about? The one where her husband verbally abused me? Where her stepdaughter destroyed my things? I focused instead on finishing my senior year strong. When graduation came around, Dad and Grandma sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. Mom was there too, with Robert and Sarah, but I barely glanced their way when I walked across the stage. We're so proud of you, sweetie, Grandma said afterward, hugging me tight. And we've got a surprise. Your father and I have been saving for your college fund. They'd saved enough to cover my tuition at the local college. I moved into the dorms that fall, ready for a fresh start. A few months into my sophomore year, Mom reached out on social media. I'm sorry about everything that happened. Can we talk? I agreed to meet her at a cafe near campus. It was awkward at first, both of us stirring our coffee too long, avoiding eye contact. Sarah's starting to look at colleges, she said. And Robert just got a new car. That's nice, I said, then quickly changed the subject. My psychology professor thinks I should consider grad school. We fell into a routine after that, monthly coffee meetings where we talked about safe topics, the weather, my classes, her work. She'd try to slip in mentions of Robert and Sarah, but I'd steer the conversation away. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. After graduation, I landed a job at Marshall & Associates as a junior project manager. Dad was thrilled and immediately offered me a place at his apartment. You could save money, Lucy, he said over dinner. No need to rush into renting. I shook my head, pushing my pasta around the plate. Thanks, Dad, but I need to do this on my own. I found a small place near work. It's time for me to stand on my own 2 feet. The apartment I rented wasn't much, but it was mine. The first night I spent there, sitting on my second-hand couch with takeout Chinese food, I felt more grown-up than ever before. Every month, I put aside a chunk of my paycheck into my future house fund. While my coworkers went out for expensive lunches, I brought sandwiches from home. When they hit the bars after work, I stayed late, tackling the projects nobody else wanted. Parker, the client's impossible, my colleague Jake warned when I volunteered for the Riverside account. They've gone through 3 project managers already. I just smiled. Watch me. 3 months later, the Riverside project was completed ahead of schedule. My boss called me into his office, looking impressed. Lucy, I've got to say, you've exceeded all expectations, he said, sliding a bonus check across his desk. Keep this up, and you're going places in this company. The quarterly bonuses started rolling in, and they weren't small. Every cent went straight into my savings account. My coworkers thought I was crazy, passing up happy hours and weekend trips. You're wasting your youth, Mom said during one of our coffee meetings 2 years later. You should enjoy life a little. I am enjoying life, I replied. I'm building my future. She stirred her coffee absently. Sarah's joining a sorority at her college. Having the time of her life. I changed the subject. The weather's been nice lately. The only times I couldn't avoid Robert and Sarah were at family gatherings, Thanksgiving at Aunt Paula's, Christmas at Uncle Mike's. I'd walk in, hug Mom, and pretend they didn't exist. Sarah, now in college herself, shoot me smug looks. She'd grown taller, more polished, but that mean streak was still there, just better hidden. Robert would stand with his arms crossed, looking down his nose at me. Still at that entry-level job, he'd say loud enough for others to hear, even though he knew I'd been promoted twice already. During last Thanksgiving, I was helping Aunt Paula in the kitchen when Mom cornered me by the refrigerator. "Lucy, don't you think this has gone on long enough?" she sighed. "Sarah's grown up now," Robert's mellowed. "Can't we just be a family?" I closed the fridge door harder than necessary. "We're not a family, Mom. We're people who happen to be connected by your marriage. That's it." "You're being childish," she said, shaking her head. "People grow, people change." "Yeah, they do," I replied, looking her straight in the eye. "I've grown enough to know I don't need toxic people in my life, even if they're technically family." She opened her mouth to argue, then just shook her head and walked away. Same old Mom, always choosing the path of least resistance, always walking away from confrontation. But every snide comment from Robert, every smug look from Sarah just reinforced that I'd made the right choice in keeping my distance. The day I turned 28, I signed the final papers on my house. After years of saving and working overtime, I'd managed to put down 60% of the total cost. The mortgage payments wouldn't keep me up at night. "Congratulations, Ms. Parker," the realtor said, handing me the keys. "It's a beautiful property." Standing in my empty living room that first day, I felt like I could finally breathe. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with granite countertops, and a backyard where I could plant a garden. All mine. I planned a housewarming party, sending invitations to family and close friends. Dad and Grandma couldn't make it, they'd recently moved to Hawaii for Dad's retirement. When I called Mom to invite her, I was specific. "I'd love for you to come, Mom." "Just you?" She hesitated. "Lucy, that's not fair to Robert and Sarah." "Mom, it's my house. My rules." She agreed, but I should have known better. The day of the party, I opened the door to find Mom standing there with Robert and Sarah in tow. "Surprise," Mom said weakly, noting my expression. I bit my tongue and let them in. Robert's eyes scanned everything, his lips curling slightly as he took in the crown molding, the hardwood floors. "It's nice," he said, making it sound like anything but. Sarah, now 22 and dressed like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, wandered around with her nose in the air. "The kitchen's kind of small, isn't it?" I was showing my colleague Jake the back patio when I overheard Sarah talking to Mom and Robert in the living room. "Daddy, I've been looking at houses too," she said loudly enough to carry. "I'm going to get one much bigger than this. With a pool." I couldn't help myself. I walked back inside. "Really? That's interesting. What job are you planning to buy it with?" Sarah's face flushed. "I have prospects." "Prospects aren't paychecks," I said. "And last I heard, you were still living off your dad's credit card." Robert's face turned that familiar shade of purple. "How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" I cut him off. "You show up uninvited to my house and then stand there insulting it?" "Lucy," Mom grabbed Robert's arm as he took a step forward. "Come on, Robert, Sarah. We're leaving." I watched them hurry out, Mom shooting me an apologetic look over her shoulder. The door closed behind them, and the party continued. 3 months after the housewarming disaster, my boss called me into his office with an opportunity one couldn't refuse, leading a major project in Boston. It would mean several months away, but it could fast-track my career to senior management. My biggest concern was my house, particularly my indoor garden. I'd spent months cultivating my collection of plants, delicate orchids, temperamental peace lilies, and my pride and joy, a rare bird of paradise that had just started to bloom. Each one needed specific care, and I couldn't bear the thought of returning to dead plants. After considering my options, I swallowed my pride and drove to Mom's house. We hadn't spoken much since the housewarming incident, but I knew she had a green thumb. Thankfully, she was alone when I arrived. "Lucy," she seemed surprised to see me on her doorstep. Is everything okay? I need a favor, I said, following her into the kitchen. I'm going to Boston for a few months for work. Could you look after my house? Mainly the plants, they need regular watering and care. Mom's face lit up. Of course, you know how much I love gardening. I handed her the spare keys, along with detailed care instructions for each plant. The next few months were intense, but rewarding. 16-hour days, working with teams across multiple time zones, but the project was going well. I called Mom every week to check on things. Everything's fine, she'd say. Your plants are thriving, don't worry so much. Just focus on your work. I should have noticed how she always seemed to be at my house when I called, no matter what time it was. I should have picked up on the background noises, dishes clinking, TV sounds, things that shouldn't have been there if she was just stopping by to water plants. But I was too absorbed in my work to notice these red flags. Finally, after 4 months, the project wrapped up successfully. I caught a late flight home, exhausted but proud of what I'd accomplished. The Uber dropped me off at my house just after midnight. All I could think about was a hot shower and my own bed. I inserted my key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, more carefully this time. Still nothing. The key that had worked perfectly for months suddenly didn't fit. What the hell? I muttered, trying again. That's when I heard it, footsteps inside my house. My house. Moving around like they belonged there. My heart started racing as I pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over 911. Before I could dial, the door swung open. And there, standing in my doorway, wearing pajamas like she owned the place, was Sarah. Her blonde hair was pulled up in a messy bun, and she had the audacity to look annoyed at my presence. What are you doing here? The words came out in a whisper, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. What am I doing here? Sarah's smile was smug. Living, of course. Been here for weeks now. Daddy helped me move in while you were gone playing big shot businesswoman in Boston. I stood there, my suitcase still in hand, trying to process her words. The exhaustion from my flight disappeared, replaced by a surge of anger. This is my house, I said through gritted teeth. Get out, now. Sarah leaned against my doorframe, and examined her manicured nails. Yeah, that's not happening. I'm quite comfortable here. The master bathroom has amazing water pressure, by the way. Get out of my house. Each word was sharp enough to cut. Sarah's response was to laugh, actually laugh, and slam the door in my face. I heard the lock click, followed by her footsteps walking away. I stood there on my own front porch, surrounded by my luggage, trembling with rage. The garden lights I'd installed illuminated the flower beds I'd so carefully planned. Through the window, I could see my living room, but it wasn't my living room anymore. Sarah's jacket was thrown over my couch, her shoes scattered on my hardwood floors. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and called Mom. She picked up on the third ring, sounding groggy. Lucy, what's wrong? What's wrong? I almost screamed. I just got home to find Sarah living in my house. She says she's been here for weeks. Tell her to get out right now, or I'm calling the police. No, don't call the police. Mom's voice went from sleepy to panicked. We're coming over. Just wait there. Where else am I supposed to go? I snapped. I'm locked out of my own house. The next 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I paced back and forth on my front porch, watching lights come on in neighboring houses. What must they think, seeing me out here in the middle of the night? A few cars drove by slowly, probably wondering if they should call the police themselves. Finally, Mom's car pulled up, Robert behind the wheel. They rushed out, both still in their pajamas under their coats. What is going on? I demanded, confronting Mom. Why does Sarah have keys to my house? Why are you letting her live here? Mom at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Lucy, honey, Sarah needed a place to stay. Her lease was up, and she couldn't afford the rent increase. Your house was just sitting empty. Just sitting empty? It's my house. You had no right. The girl needed somewhere to live, Mom said, as if that explained everything. Your house is too big for just one person anyway. We thought. We? I cut her off. There is no we when it comes to my house. You were supposed to water my plants, not move your stepdaughter in. I watched my mother's face, waiting for some sign of understanding, some acknowledgement of how completely she had betrayed my trust. Instead, she just stood there, making excuses for the inexcusable. Robert stepped forward, his chest puffed out like it had been when I was 16. Look, there was no point telling you about Sarah moving in. You would have just said no. Of course I would have said no. I was almost screaming now. It's my house. And now I can't go in there. The locks needed changing anyway, he said, waving his hand dismissively. They were old. I did you a favor. I stared at him in disbelief. You do realize that's illegal, right? You can't just change the locks on someone else's property. Legal, illegal, he scoffed. It's done now. Sarah needs a place to stay, and this house is too big for just you. Get her out, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Get her out right now, or I'm calling the police. Robert's face twisted into that familiar smirk, the one he'd worn when I was a teenager, the one that said he knew he'd win. You won't do that. Lucy, Mom stepped forward, wringing her hands. If you call the police, that's it. I won't speak to you again. Is that what you want? To destroy this family completely? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. This family? You mean the one where you let your husband illegally take over my house? That family? Instead of responding, they turned and walked into my house, leaving me standing there with my luggage. The door closed behind them with a definitive click. My hands weren't shaking anymore as I pulled out my phone. No more hesitation. No more trying to keep the peace. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report an illegal occupancy. Someone's changed the locks on my house and moved in without my permission. 20 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing. The neighbors were definitely awake now, watching from behind their curtains as I explained the situation to Officers Martinez and Chen. You're the legal owner? Officer Martinez asked. I pulled up the property records on my phone. Yes, I have all the documentation. I've been away on business, and I gave my mother a key to water my plants. Instead, they moved my stepsister in and changed all the locks. Officer Chen rang the doorbell. There was a long pause, shuffling sounds from inside. Finally, the door opened. Mom, Robert, and Sarah stood there, trying to look confident but failing. Good evening, Officer Martinez said. We need to see some identification and proof of residency from everyone. There's been a misunderstanding, Robert said, his voice oily smooth. Lucy gave permission for Sarah to stay here. They had a falling out, and now she's trying to cause trouble. That's a lie, I cut in. I never gave permission. They took advantage while I was away on business. Ask them about the locks, they'll admit they changed them without my knowledge. The old locks were faulty, Robert started. So you acknowledge changing the locks without the homeowner's permission? Officer Chen interrupted, making notes. Sarah stepped forward, her earlier smugness replaced by fear. Daddy said it would be okay. He said Lucy wouldn't mind once she got used to the idea. Sir, changing locks on someone else's property and occupying their home without permission constitutes illegal entry, Officer Martinez said, looking directly at Robert. We're going to have to take you and your daughter to the station. I watched in silence as the officers led them to the patrol car. Sarah looked smaller somehow, younger, like that 10-year-old girl who'd first walked into my life. Robert's face was purple with rage, but for once, he kept his mouth shut. Mom stood on the porch, trembling. As the patrol car pulled away, she turned to me with such hatred in her eyes that I almost took a step back. From this day forward, she said, her voice shaking, you are no longer my daughter. How could you do this to your own family? I felt strangely calm as I looked at her, this woman who had chosen everyone else over me for the past 12 years. Mom, I said quietly, you made it clear a long time ago that they were your real family. The day Sarah destroyed my research and you sat there in silence. The day Robert called me names and you looked away. Every time you asked me to be the bigger person while they treated me like dirt. You chose them. Over and over and over again. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Without another word, she walked to her car and drove away. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my living room, surrounded by Sarah's things, designer clothes thrown over my furniture, her photos stuck to my fridge, her toiletries cluttering my bathroom. In the morning, I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house changed. The police called later that day. They wanted to know if I would press charges. No, I said after a long pause. Just make sure they understand they're not allowed on my property again. I hired a cleaning service to pack up Sarah's belongings and had them delivered to Mom's house. Then I spent a weekend cleaning every inch of my home, erasing all traces of their presence. Most of my plants had died from neglect, even the bird of paradise was brown and withered. I threw them all out and started fresh. That was 3 months ago. Mom tried calling once, but I didn't pick up. Robert sent a threatening email about suing me for Sarah's emotional distress, which I forwarded to my lawyer without responding. Sarah posted some vague social media rants about toxic people who pretend to be victims, but I blocked her accounts. Last week, I ran into Aunt Paula at the grocery store. She tried to tell me that Mom was struggling with our estrangement, that I should reach out, try to make peace. Some bridges, I told her, need to stay burned. I'm sleeping better these days. My new plants are thriving in the sunlight that streams through my windows. Dad and Grandma call regularly from Hawaii, and I'm planning to visit them next month. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for the phone to call Mom, out of habit more than anything else. But then I remember that night on my porch, locked out of my own home, and the urge passes.